friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 8 of my 2025 Valentine Card Series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Mama Elephant's Up With Love and Scene Builder. I've stamped those images on 2 panels of Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to start with the images from Up With Love, and I'm going to work on the bunny first, and I'm going to color him using some brown shades using E50, E51, E53, and E55. First thing I want to do is just map out his coloration, so I'm going to add some little patches on his face and also a big patch down his back. And so I'm using that E50 to kind of map out where those are going to go. That way, if they're not in the right placement, I could use my colorless blender and kind of shift those around or color over them with a darker shade. Once I have those laid in, I will come in with my darkest, which is that E55, and start to add a bit of shadow. Once I have that laid in, I'll start to blend that out with the next color, which is going to be E55, and I will make sure to catch the edge of the previous shade, that E55, and pull it into this color so that I create a nice smooth transition. Although I will say that my markers are extremely dry right now, and so they are a little bit harder to blend with. So I definitely need to do a refill day. I've mentioned this several times, so I don't want to keep going on about it, but the results that you're seeing on screen aren't the results that you would normally get when your markers are full. It just requires a little bit of effort. So if you're kind of getting results like this with your Copic markers, it could be that yours are also running dry and you just need to take the time to refill them, which I am definitely going to do next week. It absolutely has to happen. So anyway, I am filling in with the E51, and then I also added in a little bit of that E50, and then I started going in with a second layer. This helps with the blend. It also increases the saturation and depth of the coloring. So I wanted to do that, especially since the blend wasn't quite to the level that I prefer. So I'm just going to keep going over this guy until he is nice and rich in tone and all of the brown areas are filled in. Once I'm done with those, I'm going to switch to some warm grays. I'm going to use W00 and W1, and I will add just a little bit of shadow to the white parts of his body. So I'll use that W1 first. In a few little areas, I will also overlap into the brown just to create a seamless transition between the two shades. I'm also going to add some of this warm gray to his tail to make that look nice and fluffy. I put it on his inner ear so that when I add the pink later on, it's just a little bit more natural with that gray undertone. And then I'll switch to some golden shades for my little chick. I'm going to use Y11, Y13, Y15, and Y26. That Y26 is a very desaturated golden tone. It has a little bit of brown undertone to it, and that is going to help this chick tie in to the bunny and just mute those brighter yellow shades a little bit with those shadows. So I blended out the Y26 with the Y15 and then used the Y13. And then the Y11 was the highlight, and I did do a second layer on this little guy as well. And then for his beak and feet, I'm going to bring in YR12 and YR14, a little YR14 first, blend out with the YR12, and then I'll go back and add a little extra of the darkest shade. I'm going to give these guys some rosy cheeks using R00, R21, and R22. A little R22 on the cheek area. I like to do an oval shape, but you can also just do a little circle if that's the shape you prefer. And then I blend around the edges of that with the R21. And then I will soften that even further into the fur with the R00. And just like with everything else, if it doesn't stay bright enough or doesn't feel saturated enough for you, just go in with a second layer. I'll add the R21 and the R00 to the inner ear, and I also colored in his little pads of his feet. And then I kept the R21 and R22, but I'm going to add in R24 and R29 to do my heart-shaped balloons. And I want to leave a rim light on these balloons, so I'm not coloring right up to the black line. I'm leaving a little bit of space between this darkest shadowed area and the edge so that the object looks really rounded and transparent. And then I'll start to blend out with the R24. I'm only doing that on the inner part of the line for right now, and just pulling that color a little bit further inside. I will do that for the second balloon as well. I wanted them both to be red, so I'm just going to do them at the same time rather than switching back and forth between markers. Then I'll come in with that third shade, which is the R22, and that is what I'm going to use to fill in the rim light on the outside edge. And then I'll also bring it to the inner part of the balloon. And you could stop here and just fill in completely with the R22 if you wanted to, but I really like having that fourth shade in there for an extra bit of highlight, especially for something like a balloon that is meant to be transparent. I think that extra little bit of lightness in there just really lends itself to an object like this. So I'm going to fill in with that R21. And then once again, I am going to do a second layer on everything. I often do a second layer on my images. Sometimes I leave it in the video. Sometimes I eliminate it just because it does make the video quite a bit longer. But yeah, that's the great thing about Copics, is that you can just work over them as many times as you want to, as long as you're using the correct paper, a paper that can hold the ink and doesn't, you know, make it end up saturating too quickly and bleeding outside of the lines. Or using a paper that is too absorbent, like a watercolor paper, for example, that is just going to suck your markers dry and not give you a very good blend either, because there's not enough smooth surface to move that ink around. But now I'm going to take a black Sakura Jelly Roll marker and get that going off to the side, and I will go over the eyes of my bunny, and then I'll set this aside and move on to our second panel. For my second panel, we are going to be doing a complete background, and so I have just stamped the mountain range down toward the lower portion from that Scene Builder stamp set. And I am going to color that using some blue-green shades. I'm using BG72, BG75, and BG78. So that's not normally a color combo that I would reach for mountains, but because so many of my markers are so dry, I am kind of being forced to choose different combos that I don't reach for as much, just because they have a little bit more ink in them. And so that is how I ended up with this combo, but I ended up really liking how they turned out. It's definitely something different, but I liked it. My BG75 was darker than my BG78, so I just went back over the shadowed areas with that, and then I am blending out with the BG72. And then I thought maybe I might leave a little bit of room for the BG70. And so at first I was kind of leaving some space on some of these mountains. But that BG70 is so super light. I will end up using it for the snow caps, so you'll see it in just a minute. But it is so super light that it is really hard to blend even with the BG72. There is so much colorless blender in it that it will just try to repel anything that it comes up against. So I usually will just reserve that for objects that I want to look completely transparent, like a fairy's wings or a glass jar or something like that, or objects that I just want to add the barest hint of color to and have them look white, like the snow caps on these mountains. So I just filled in everything with that BG72, and then here is that BG70 that I'm going to bring in now. And even just adding like a lot of ink down, you can still barely see it. And you know, this is when it's wet. It will dry back a little bit and be a little bit less visible, but I do think it works perfect for something like this. It is such a pretty shade. Then I am going to move on to the grass below the mountains. And again, so many of my green markers are so dry that it's really, really hard to color a wide area like this. So I'm reaching for colors that I don't reach for often, like these blue greens. So this is also in the same family as the mountains, but these are definitely much more olive leaning. They are in the 90s, so they do have a lot of gray in them, and they're just very, very desaturated. So I am using those, but it is a similar situation where that BG90 is so pale that it really tries to push away the BG93. I did try to do a little bit of tip to tip to pick up some of that BG93 with the tip of the BG90 and start to blend that out. And that helped a little bit, but I ended up just having to keep going back and forth between these two markers and laying them down and allowing it to kind of react and push the darker shade away, but then coming back in with a little bit more of the dark color until I reached a balance that I liked. Now, normally when I do a full sheet background with Copics, I prefer to start with the sky. I like to get that out of the way first and then, you know, do any cleanup that I need to and then do the rest of my coloring. But today I wanted to try things a little bit differently. I wanted to start with my ground images and then just mask those off so that I could continue coloring the sky. So if you like to do the bottom first, or if you forgot to do your sky first, this is another option of something that you can do. I just stamped that mountain range onto a piece of masking paper, and I'm cutting that out with my Cutter Bee Teflon coated scissors. And then I am going to peel off the mask and place that right over the coloring that I've just done. So I'll just carefully line that up right against the black outline and then smooth that down into place. Now I can work on my sky, and I'm going to use BG quadruple 0, BG10, and BG11. And I'm going to do some flicking motions. So it's a little bit tricky to do this flicking motion when you're coloring an image like those mountains that have so many little dips and so many little corners, little triangles of area that you need to get in there, but you're not wanting to get it in the actual image because then you'll have a lot of cleanup to do, and some of it can be hard to remove. And, you know, the mountain caps are supposed to be white, so you don't want too much color in there. So that's why I had the idea of the mask. And it actually worked really well. I was able to use the side of my marker to get those nice long strokes that usually help you have a smoother blend when you're coloring a large area like this. Again, my markers are dry, so it's not as smooth as it normally would be. Maybe I'll have to do another background similar to this after I get my markers refilled and cleaned up so that you can kind of see the difference. But anyway, I'm just working my way back and forth, trying to smooth out that transition as best as possible between those three shades. and I still wasn't super happy with it, so I decided to do another little trick to just help distract when your blend isn't completely smooth, and that is to add some dot detail. So I'm taking my colorless blender and just pressing that into the page so that that marker kind of wicks away the color in that spot and leaves behind a little kind of white dot or less color in the dot. It makes it almost like the BG quadruple zero area. If you press longer, it would go white. But I'm going to do that with the BG10 as well, adding a few little dots, just creating some more interest. And like I said, kind of distracting from the fact that it isn't completely smooth. I'm also making sure to vary the size of the dots, using the larger ones down toward the mountain range where the color is darker, and then smaller dots toward the top where the sky is lighter. And I did also bring in the BG11 and add a few with that. So I do think this is an especially nice technique to do when you're doing underwater scenes, because then it can look like bubbles, especially if you use it with the colorless blender. But normally if I'm using Distress Oxide inks, I do some splatter detail as well to add some interest. So this was just a different variation of that. And once I'm happy, I can peel off that mask and reveal the completed background. I trimmed down that panel, and now I am going to pop that in my MISTI so that I can stamp my sentiment. I'm going to do that in VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I am using a sentiment that says, "Sending you all the hearts," stamping that down in the bottom area where the grass is. And I kind of left that center area a bit lighter so that it would help the sentiment stand out more. I stamped that down twice to make sure it was legible, and now I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using Lawn Fawn Mermaid cardstock and stamping in Merman ink. And I am going to use another image and sentiment from that Up With Love stamp set. I chose the little bear. I just really love the movement of how his body is kind of swinging out to the sides. So I decided to do that up the left top area and then put the sentiment over toward the right in the center. Next, I wanted to create a frame, so I am taking the Mama Elephant Flirty Scallop frames and die cutting that out of some Lawn Fawn Ballet Slippers cardstock. I can save that center part for another project, but the frame I am going to add some foam tape to the back in some thin strips, and then I can pull off those release papers. I'm not going to pop that over the background just yet though, because I also want to add a few little clouds to this scene just to fill it in more completely. And again, it's going to help cover up any areas that aren't perfectly blended. So I did 3 small clouds. These are from the Lawn Fawn Spring Showers die set. This is the smallest of the 3 clouds, and I just die cut it 3 times. And I'm going to stagger those across the sky. And I am gluing those flat down with some Barely Art Precision Craft Glue. Once I have those situated, then I can add that frame. So I'm just going to line that up carefully, making sure that that sentiment is reading straight across. And then I can pop that down into place. I'll grab my card base, add some liquid glue to the back of this, and then I will line that up on the card front and smooth that down. So this is an A2 standard size card. It is 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. And then I'm going to bring in my images. I thought about popping them up on foam tape, but it's always tricky with those balloon strings. So I decided to just glue them flat to the card. That also helps the frame kind of stand out a little bit more and makes the scene a little bit more recessed, which I liked. So I'm going to add my 2 little characters floating above that mountain range. I decided I wanted to add just a hint of color to the bottom of those clouds. So I'm going back to my BG70, which I used for the snow on the mountains, and just adding a few little flicks of that to give them some extra dimension. And then I wanted to add a bit of embellishment, so I'm going to take the strawberry Valentine mix from Pretty Pink Posh and just pour those out into my Twiddler's Nook embellishment tray. And I'm going to choose out a few of these hearts in a variety of colors and adhere those to the card. And I am using my embellishment wand to pick those up with the sticky end and then kind of move them into position with the more solid end. And then I just add the little bead of glue right underneath. I can also use that tip to kind of clean up any little glue that splooges out the sides. So yeah, I wanted to pull some of that red down lower on the card, so I added that on top of the mountain range, and I really liked how that stood out against that blue-green. So the one little heart that I had ready to go was a bit of a thicker one. These hearts are made out of clay, and some of them are a little bit thicker and some of them are thinner, and since the ones that I had used already on the card were on the thinner side, I just decided to replace that white one over on the right with a thinner one as well, and kind of go with a little bit more of a consistent size. So I adhered 3, and then I was trying to decide if I wanted to go with a couple more or if 3 was enough. So I kind of laid them out and figured out the placement of everything once I did the 3 to decide if I wanted more or not before I committed to them. But ultimately, I did like how the colors kind of added to the lower part of the card and just gave it more of a pop, gave it more of like a cheerful vibe with, you know, the happy little hearts. So I did decide to add all of these. So I'm just going to quickly glue those down. Sometimes less is more, and it's better to be a bit subtle, but in this case today, I just felt like the little pops of color really added something special to the card. And of course, I wanted to add a little bit of glitter, so I am adding some Stardust stickles to the bottom edge of the clouds, and I also put it on the snow caps on the mountains, just so anything that was white would be a little bit sparkly and reflective. And that is going to finish up this card for today. So I am going to lift that up so you can see all of the detail, hopefully catch a little bit of that sparkle and shine. And I will also give you another peek at the inside. If you enjoyed this one, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. The products I use will be listed and linked in the description bar down below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here is day 8 of the previous 2 years of Valentine Card Series. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.